All right, for chapter four, the title of the chapter is Body Basics, and it really goes into a lot of details about some general chemistry terms and some basic biology, even a little cell biology, and then even a little anatomy and physiology. There's a lot of things in the chapter as far as the textbook goes, and so we won't have time to cover every single thing that's in the chapter. So, as you're preparing for the tests and things like that, make sure you kind of watch the lecture videos, focus on the vocabulary and the notes inside of the PowerPoint slides and that sort of thing. I'll also probably divide this lecture series into about three lectures to just kind of give us time to go through each of these areas. So chapter four starts out um, by looking at just some basic chemistry terms. And, we think of this, even though it's a nutrition class, I think it's good to kind of go over a few basic things as far as chemistry goes, because that's what we're talking about, really, the chemicals of life, those nutrients. And we're getting ready to start kind of going through a list of nutrients. Each nutrient that we're going to go over has a chapter really dedicated to it. And so we're getting ready to start looking at some of the macronutrients, and then we've got some micronutrients categories as well to look at. And so it's good to know a little bit about some basic chemistry. And so there, of course, we've seen this definition already in chapter one, the study of composition and characteristics of matter. And then also this chapter goes into a little bit of human physiology. And I know some of you are either currently taking or will be taking an anatomy physiology type course. And so some of this you may have seen before. It's just some basic things, but sometimes it's good to kind of understand a little bit about the body so that you understand how these nutrients and how overall nutrition is affecting. With that, and this is just some basic science that you've probably seen since, I don't know, about first or second grade, elements. If you think about the periodic table of elements, is your chemistry definition is there. Any substance that can't be broken down into simpler substances. We talk about the building blocks of matter. And so, when you think of the food that you eat, really, you're just eating elements that are all put together. And so whether you're, eating carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates, you're eating, carbon and hydrogen and oxygen elements, and that have been joined together in the chemical means. Um, and then if you're eating things that have minerals in it, your body is not making minerals on its own. But can you think of certain minerals that you get in your diet? Maybe you're drinking milk that has calcium in it. That's a mineral. Or you're eating some kind of maybe a meat product or even plant products that have iron there. And so that's a mineral that's needed in the body. And so again, we've got a whole nother chapter that deals with minerals. And so there's many different minerals that we'll be looking at, through the course. Solutions, another good chemistry term. Whenever you take two or more compounds and you mix them together, and they basically dissolve, and they are very, the molecules are evenly distributed in that mixture, then you have a solution. And you probably have seen these words before: solvent and solute. Solvent is, a lot of times when we talk about the body, we're talking about water as being the solvent. It's what's doing the dissolving, if you want to think of it that way. And the solute is what you're putting into the solvent to try to dissolve. And if you have a salt water solution, then the water is your solvent, and the salt that you add to it, the sodium chloride that you add to it, will be the solute. And water is critical for the body. We know we need to be hydrated, and there's many different things. And again, we've got another chapter later on that deals with looking at water. But one of the things that water does for us is allow for solutions to be made inside of the body. And so it dissolves many things, and that allows the nutrients that we eat to get into a solution, and then we can absorb those, and they can be transported through the body. And so, you can see the solution there of Gatorade, very common electrolyte containing solution. And so, it has different ingredients. You can look at the ingredient list sometime, but it's got different ingredients. It's got some water-based solvent. It's a water solvent. It's got electrolytes in there, mainly sodium chloride, salt. And then, of course, it's going to have some kind of sweetener in there, some kind of, sucrose or something. Ions, another good chemistry term that you've probably seen before. Your definition there for an ion, an atom that has a positive or negative charge. If you think about elements on the periodic table, an atom is basically neutral, but an ion has a charge associated with it. And so it's either gained or lost electrons. And so if something has gained an electron, then it's going to have a negative charge. And I've given you a negative example there. So chloride has gained an electron here, and so it has an overall negative charge. And so if it loses an electron, then it's going to have a positive charge associated with it. And so sodium and potassium here would be positive ions. As far as ions go, sometimes you'll see the term cation associated with positive ions, and sometimes you'll see the term anion that are associated with negative ions. A lot of times you see this word, especially in nutrition, electrolytes, and so that's just kind of a biochemical term associated with ions. Instead of just referring to these as ions, it refers to these charged atoms as electrolytes. That kind of reminds us that these are needed to allow for electrical signals to pass through a solution, and we have to do that in our bodies because we have electrical impulses going through our bodies for nervous system functions and muscle contractions and all of these action potentials. Electrical signals that are traveling through the body require electrolytes. We need to talk briefly about acids and bases, and so there's different ways you can define chemically what an acid and base is, but this definition here fits for our purposes. Any kind of substance that donates hydrogen ions or protons into a solution would be considered an acid, and any substance that has the ability to accept or absorb, I kind of think of it almost like a sponge trying to absorb hydrogen ions from a solution, that would be considered a base. Now, you can see the pH scale. Most everybody realizes how the pH scale works. 7.0 here on the figure there, that's neutral, that's pure water. Anything below 7 is going to be acid. Anything above 7 is going to be basic or alkaline. And so this little figure is kind of nice because it shows us some of the food examples that we may have. You notice that in general, some of the things that we think about as food items generally fall on the acid side more so than the alkaline side. And so, in other words, if you think about milk is slightly acidic. Coffee is, bananas, tomatoes are pretty acidic. You get down to the acid level somewhere around 2 or 2.5. You've got vinegar that's used in cooking, and then different beverages like Coke or colas. They're usually fairly acidic as well. Lemon juice is pretty low as well. Above 7 or the alkaline area, not too many food sources are in this category. A little bit of egg white, it says here, is about a pH of 8. And that's usually because as you increase in the pH here on the pH scale, foods become more bitter. And so generally we don't have too many food sources anyway that are on the scale above 7. And you can kind of see some of these things like baking soda has a pH of a 9.5, and on up ammonia with 11. So chemical reactions, we're still kind of talking a little bit about the chemistry area. Chemical reactions, changes in the arrangements of atoms and molecules. You're doing chemical reactions all the time in your body. And to kind of put that into application purposes, if you think about the foods that you eat, you have to have a chemical reaction to basically go through digestion. And that's what this chapter is trying to build us up to, is looking at the process of digestion. So if you had carbohydrates this morning, or if you had proteins for lunch, you have to go through chemical reactions to change those proteins, digest those proteins into smaller substances, or like amino acids. And so chemical reactions is what's going on here. And again, we're building up to talking about digestion, where you're taking those food molecules and you're breaking them down into smaller ones. Technically, that's what's called in chemistry a decomposition reaction. We mentioned this word way back in chapter 1, but metabolism is if you can think of all the different types of chemical reactions taking place inside of your body, inside of all living cells, that's basically your metabolism. We a lot of times associate metabolism with energy, and there is energy either being used up or released in different types of metabolic reactions, and so it does have a play on our energy levels. If you're not familiar with these words, these are pretty easy, but make sure you know catabolism versus anabolism. Catabolism is anytime you're breaking something down. And the classic good example for this, for our purposes, would be digestion, because like I said, you have maybe some starch in your food today. That starch has to be broken down into smaller and smaller sugar compounds, sugar units. And so that would be a catabolic type of a reaction. Anytime you build something up, that's anabolism or an anabolic reaction. And so if you're making something, and again, your body's doing this all the time as well, you're taking those, let's say you have some protein, you go through a catabolic reaction, you break those proteins down into amino acids, and now you've got to build up new proteins out of those amino acids that you just have now formulated. And now you take those amino acids and you build up new compounds, new proteins from those amino acids. So that would be anabolic reactions. Most of the time, all of these chemical reactions, metabolic reactions, require some kind of molecule called an enzyme. That's just another good chemistry term. It helps to speed up a chemical reaction. And it catalyzes, it speeds up a chemical reaction. Sometimes enzymes are called biological catalysts. And a couple things about enzymes. One is that it speeds up a reaction, but it doesn't get changed or altered during the process. So what that means is you're not changing the enzyme. It's not part of it's involved in the chemical reaction, but it doesn't get used up. And so that means you can reuse it and it can be used over again. Most of your enzymes are proteins, so they're protein based. Usually, maybe not always, but usually you'll find that enzymes end in the ending ASE. And so I've listed out a couple of enzyme examples. Sucrase, that's pretty nicely named. And so if you remember, table sugar is sucrose. And so sucrose requires an enzyme to break it down into two separate sugar units. Lactase, the same thing. It's used to break down lactose. Lipase is used to break down fats or lipids. Protease is the name of a group of enzymes that are needed to break down proteins. And you see the little diagram there. You got table sugar. We'll talk more about this in chapter 5 when we get to carbohydrates, but you got table sugar, the sugar we use to sweeten things with most of the time. Maybe you put it in your coffee or tea. It's basically made up of two sugar units. That enzyme sucrase is needed and will break this chemical bond. And so you're left with your products here are glucose and fructose. Section 2 goes over a little bit more biology. And so again, this is just, we'll kind of do a little brief review of some things here. We won't cover everything. You should know, and we'll talk about things like anatomy and physiology, the anatomy, the structure of something. In this case, right now, we're looking at the structure of the cell, but you could talk about the structure of the human body as well. Physiology being the function of something, the function of either the cell or the cell organelle, little structures inside of the cell, but also the function of the different body systems. That's part of our physiology. You probably remember from a basic bio class that the cell is considered to be the smallest living part of an organism, the smallest living functional unit of an organism. And so whether or not you're talking about a skin cell or a liver cell or a brain cell or neuron, a muscle cell, these are all living functional units inside of the body. Each of our cells have organelles. That word just means small organs, little structures inside of the cell that help to carry out some kind of function. So, for example, the nucleus of a cell, and they always draw a cell kind of like this, but many of your cells don't really look quite like this. If you think about a muscle cell, it's a very long fiber-like cell. But here you have a general picture of a cell, and you've got a nucleus on the inside, and that's where your genetic material is at. You have mitochondria. You probably remember mitochondria is a site of cell respiration. In other words, it's making ATP. We'll look at that a little bit later in the semester, but you're making energy, through these cell organelles called mitochondria. Of course, you have membranes around the cells and membrane around the nucleus. Once you put all these cells together, you generally have what's called a tissue. And these are cells that generally have similar characteristics. They work together and they have a similar purpose or function to work with. Human body, we talk about four major categories of tissues. Epithelial tissue generally forms some kind of lining, usually on the outside of something, but it's also inside of the body. You think of your skin as epithelial tissue, but also different membranes inside the body as epithelial tissue. Connective tissue, you have a lot of different examples of connective tissue, and it does what it sounds like. These cells are working together to literally hold things together, maybe also for protection, also just for support of your internal organs. But your bone has connective tissue there. Your fat cells, fat storing cells, your adipocytes store up lipids. And so that's a connective tissue called adipose. Even your blood, even though it's liquid, is a type of connective tissue. Muscle tissue, you've got three different types of muscle tissue in the body, and then your nervous tissue made up of neurons that you find in your brain, your spinal cord, and your nervous system. Then, as you see, we're kind of building up what's called a hierarchy here. So we started out with a cell, and you have cells kind of together, working together. Here you got some epithelial cells here, work together with epithelial tissue. Now you take this tissue, you put it together, and you form some kind of an organ. And so organ is basically tissues kind of working together. They have a similar type of function, working together to form an organ, and then organs that are working together for a particular purpose generally are what are referred to as an organ system. So I know this is not a anatomy physiology class, but I think it's good to just kind of review very, very quickly the different organ systems of the body, because overall our nutrition is helping our overall health. And so there are times when we'll talk about cardiovascular problems. So we're kind of, we need to know what that word means. Cardiovascular system includes the heart, of course, and all of the vessels that are circulating the blood, including the blood, the blood, the nutrients is circulating, water circulating throughout the body. So anything transporting throughout the body is going through the circulatory system. But there will be times when we mention something in our nutrition or lack of nutrition that may impact the cardiovascular system. Same thing about the respiratory system. Of course, your lungs, and the main purpose there is to go through oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange so that your body can get the oxygen that it needs. You'll need to use that oxygen to help you burn glucose. And there's a little chapter we'll talk about that a little later on. And then in that process, you produce a little bit of waste gas product, carbon dioxide, that your lungs will help you exhale. The lymphatic system, your immune system, our nutrition, our diet impacts our immunity, our overall health. And things like antioxidants or things like vitamin C that's important in our immune system. Our immune system helps overall, or our lymphatic system helps overall to help maintain the proper fluid balance. That goes back to water and hydration, but also help the body defend itself against certain types of diseases or pathogens. Urinary system, we'll mention a few things about that. Of course, that's the kidneys trying to filter out toxic substances from the blood. It also is involved in helping to maintain proper water balance or fluid balance. And so we'll mention a couple things about the kidneys as we go through. Muscles. This is, of course, how we're moving and providing support protection for the body. This is requiring a lot of energy. So all of those nutrients, or a lot of the nutrients that we're taking in, especially carbohydrates, especially fats, even proteins, can be used to get the energy that our muscles need to go through contraction and relaxation. Skeletal system. This is very important, of course. We've got to have strong bones to function and to make sure we have the proper movement and protection for our body. But it also serves as a site for mineral storage. And so you can store calcium phosphate, or calcium crystallized portions of our bone matrix inside of the bone. And so that's important to go back into the bloodstream whenever we need it. Got to have the proper amount of calcium in the blood to make sure you have the right action potentials, or the electrical signals in the body are being transmitted correctly. And so that affects our nervous system, but also affects our muscle contractions. It's also, our bones are also where we're producing red bone cells, because you have red bone marrow in most of your bones, and especially your larger, longer bones. You got the red bone marrow that's there, and that's producing red blood cells that helps to transport oxygen through the body. Our nervous system, that's kind of our where all of our thought processes are taking place in the brain, spinal cord, and all of the nerves transmitting signals or action potentials out through the body. That's coordinating everything. It's processing information. It's sending signals to our heart to kind of regulate our heart rate, or regulate our respiration. And so it's coordinating everything. It's also sending signals to our glands to release hormones to help the body function as well. Endocrine system is that system that is producing hormones, and you've got many different glands that are producing different hormones that help the body, whether it's in growth or maturity, or helping to, we'll talk about a few hormones throughout. We'll talk about insulin a little bit, kind of maintaining, balancing your blood glucose levels, reproductive hormones. So you've got many different hormones that are helping to balance different areas of the body. The integumentary system, it's your skin, hair, and nails. Your integument is your covering of the body. Your skin is sometimes thought of as the largest organ of the body. It's there for protection, trying to keep out harmful microbes or toxins or anything on the outside. And we end with the reproductive system here. Of course, that's reproductive structures, ovaries, and testes, also producing hormones there. And then the last system is digestive system. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about this because it does have a direct impact on our nutrition and our, the way we digest things. But we'll talk about digesting food a little bit. And so just a couple of terms here: bioavailability, the extent to which the digestive tract absorbs nutrients and how well the body uses them. And so there's a process that we'll kind of look at in this chapter. As far as digestion goes, if you think about eating the foods that we eat, we have to go through the process to digest them. What bioavailability is referring to is, okay, so we digest the foods. Now we got to absorb the foods. We got to get those nutrients that we just digested transferred from the small intestines, even a little bit in the large intestines, but mainly from the small intestines into the bloodstream. But certain things don't transfer as quickly as others. Certain nutrients don't pass from the intestines as quickly into the bloodstream as others. So there are certain diseases or illnesses that slow down or inhibit the bioavailability of the nutrients. Even though you're eating the nutrients, then if you can't get them absorbed into the bloodstream, then you're having a problem there with the digestive system. And so, having those nutrients digested is one part, but having them available means you got to be able to get them, absorbed from the intestines where they finish their digestion. In other words, you've taken some proteins and you've broken them down into amino acids. Now I got to get those amino acids to be available into the body so that the body can use those. So we'll stop here for this lecture, but we'll pick up in the next lecture with looking at the digestive system and some of the major structures that are part of it.